Welcome to The Uncanny Lens, where we are exploring self-concept reflections in pop culture and media. I'm your co-host, Jinx.
And I'm Minx.
And today we are really honored to have a guest with us. I would like to introduce you all to Emmy Marie. Emmy is a certified trauma-informed somatic coach and NARM practitioner who specializes in helping clients create thriving lives and relationships after trauma. As an abuse survivor herself, Emmy understands the devastation that trauma can have on our lives and is committed to helping as many people as possible access their power and heal from trauma. She supports clients in her one-on-one coaching work, as well as through courses, a monthly membership community, and speaking engagements. She's based in Oregon in the Pacific Northwest in the United States of America, but she sees clients virtually all over the world. She's also the host of the Heal in Harmony podcast. Welcome, Emmy.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you. We're delighted to have you. What we're going to be talking about today is Taylor Swift. And before we get started, I would just like us to all check in our media mindset this week. Minx, what is new in your media mindset this week?
Thank you for asking. So I just finished the book Fairy Tale by Stephen King. It was a long one, but it was so good that I kind of just sped through it because it was so much fun. I was just glued to the pages. And it just, oh my gosh, it's all fantasy and it's this, world building and really interesting characters and has really inspired like my dreams of late. And so I've had some like pretty crazy, wacky dreams lately that have been so fun, like flying and like entering deep, dark caverns and like finding gems and like all this like very magical stuff in my dream world. I feel like believing in magic is really just a potent topic. It's so much fun. And it's just bringing out my inner child. And I want to be reading more books like that and possibly like just engaging in more magical media. I'm like craving it right now. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that sounds really fun.
I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. How about you, Jinx?
Well, I've been watching the second season of Paris in Love, and I've only watched the first couple of episodes so far. But something that really continues to strike me about Paris Hilton, and I'll say Britney Spears as well, is how many similarities I see in their family dynamics and mine, and just the trauma and abuse, and just how unsettling it is to see, I guess, on TV, and to see that it's being presented as kind of normal, I guess, which is weird. Like I'm sitting here thinking, is this the best edit they have for Kathy Hilton? Because if so, like, how can she be okay with that? You know what I mean? I'm just shocked.
Yikes.
And it's something that I continue to sort of think about when it comes to the older generation of boomers and how they sort of treat their children, especially if their children are trying to heal the relationship after trauma. And it's just very, very interesting to me. And as much as I love watching it, it's also difficult for me to watch sometimes. But I do want to say that something that is an overwhelming feeling that I have most of the time is just how much happiness, I guess, I have that Paris is healing and trying to make all of her dreams come true and give herself everything that she's wanted in this life, despite how she may be treated by her family. And it makes me very happy for her, and it warms my heart in a way that I can't quite explain because I don't know this person. I don't know her, and I don't know of any other similarities that I have with her, right? Except for this kind of trauma sort of similarity. And it's just really a lot to reflect on, I guess, is what I'll leave it at. Yeah. How about you, Emmy?
Wow. Yeah, I've had an interesting week related to the media. yeah, I don't want to do any spoilers, but I watched the new Hunger Games movie last week, and it
Ooh.
actually it I've read the book, so I was, prepared. I knew what was going to happen, and
Mm-hmm.
obviously the Hunger Games are, about violence, like that's kind of the whole theme, but my actual like abusive relationship trauma got triggered a little bit by some
Mm.
events that transpired that obviously I'm not going to reveal here for the spoilers, but yeah, it was an interesting experience. I'm like so many years into my healing journey and now like, offer trauma informed coaching and all that work I do. So I don't really get triggered all that often. So it was interesting to have that experience in a movie that I was really prepared for and ultimately really loved the movie, but yeah, I had a couple days of just really needing to tend to my grief and my nervous system and kind of
Mm.
my inner teen. Yeah, so it was interesting to see the way that like a movie can really stir up past emotions and trauma compared to I read the book and it didn't do the same thing. So yeah, that's kind of something that
Oh,
happened to me
interesting.
recently. Yeah.
Oh, I
Mm.
love that. Because that's what our all of our work here is based around is making sure that we are taking
Mm,
care of ourselves when we're exposed to media that may be unpleasant, unexpected, or in some unwanted even. You know what I mean? And for you to have gone into this feeling prepared because you read the book and still having these types of emotions is really interesting. So
hmm
I'm so glad that you
Mm.
shared that with us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was like trying to think of how to answer that question and I was like, "Oh wow, something like really relevant happened this week."
I think that's a really good opportunity for us to get into this episode about Taylor Swift and her music
Hmm
and her pop culture relevance and the reflections and influence that that can have on our own self concept, particularly as it relates to
hmm
healing, and where we see that reflected back to us in society and sort of the
hmm
collective self concept, I guess, for lack of a better word. So,
Mm-hmm.
okay, are you guys ready to get into this then? I'm excited.
Let's do
Yeah.
I'm
it.
so excited. I didn't know much about Taylor Swift going into this. I knew just because I don't live under a rock, I knew about the basic stuff, you know what I mean? But I don't really know much about her music. And so this has really been an opportunity for me to research and learn about her. And I've been really surprised at some of the things that I've learned. And so, what I'd like to start with is her self concept at the beginning of her career. So, where do we think her self concept may have been? And what were we seeing reflected through her music and relevance in pop culture with where, I mean, obviously, we're making assumptions here because we're not inside Taylor's brain, but we can take, what she's shared with us through her music, through her documentaries and other ways that she's expressed herself. Where do we think that her self-concept may have been and what were we seeing reflected through her music and relevance?
Yeah, this is a really great question. So, for context, I kind of became a Swiftie when she released the album Evermore, which was about 3 years ago. But when I was a young teenager, I was very into her second album, Fearless. So, I had like this big gap where I just like was not a fan and didn't follow her work at all. So, it's
Mm.
been sort of this interesting experience of like now that I'm, fully obsessed with her music to kind of go back and listen to all the albums and kind of get acquainted from them with like all these years of separation compared to actually like walking that alongside her, so to
Mm-hmm.
speak.
Mm.
But my understanding of like her, music at the beginning, it seems like a big part of her brand and how she was gaining traction was sort of this Miss Americana kind of America's
Yes.
sweetheart type thing. I mean, she was like 16 years old when the first album came out,
Mm-hmm.
so very young and sort of this like wide-eyed innocence type thing, very
Yeah,
like good
100%.
girl imagery, but also having a bit of like sass and kind of like a confident side. I don't think she ever really seemed super meek or anything. Like the
Mm-hmm.
second album was literally called Fearless, so kind of had that brave, like almost I would say like Gryffindor type brand. She's a
Yeah.
Sagittarius sun. I also see that a lot too. There's like some confidence there. But yeah, that's kind of my impression of her self concept back then.
Yeah, I think it's interesting how she kind of goes back and shows us her self-concept through music videos and
Mm-hmm.
um like Look at What You Made Me Do video where she has
Mm-hmm.
like that lineup of all of her past archetype selves, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we do see this kind of wide-eyed, like deer in the headlights, like, oh my gosh, like fame, you know, like
Yeah.
fame is coming at me. Like, what do I do? You know, there is this like, but it is this very sweet innocence, and she doesn't seem scared. It's
Mm-hmm.
just overwhelmed. Like, I almost see her as
Mm.
somebody who's like taking it all in and like, oh shit, okay, here I am. This is what I did. I'm famous
Mm-hmm.
now. Like, how do I
Yeah.
navigate this? Right.
Right.
But I like that bravery. Like, you know, I do see a sense of like bravery, excitement. I think she does also talk about like wanting to be kind of what everybody wants her to be. So
Right.
there is this aspect of her having to like play a role at the
For sure.
beginning because she is a teenager. Like that's what we're
Right.
doing in our teenage years. Like we don't quite know exactly who we are and we're trying
Right.
on different ways of being, and you do get a sense for that as well, right?
Right. And you've got a contract with a record label that's kind of probably
Right.
directing who you're supposed to be as well, at
Yeah.
least in your
Yeah,
public persona.
exactly.
Well, and
Yeah.
specifically, she
Mm-hmm.
started out in country, which I feel has a
Right.
lot of, I don't know if rigidity is the word. Maybe it's like tradition
Mm.
or something where you're sort of
Yeah.
expected to toe a certain line. Anyway, that's my impression of
Yeah.
country
Absolutely.
music. And it's one of the reasons that I don't find myself aligned with it very often is because there seems to be like a particular mindset and that's it. There and maybe it's changed over
Mm.
the years. That I'm talking about the country music that I was exposed to when I was younger, so like in the 70s and 80s. That type of music, and
Yeah.
it just seemed like it was very much like you thought a particular way, you had particular beliefs, and sometimes
Mm-hmm.
that felt as if it was presented to me as very like conservative. And so it could be really
Mm-hmm.
hard
Yeah.
to sort of break out or branch out.
It seems like she was, very committed to doing what she needed to do to get her career going.
Yeah.
Like it seems like
Right.
she's always been really driven and ambitious.
Yeah, and there was this
Mm-hmm.
sort of approval that maybe she needed to seek,
Right.
where like she was maybe trying to seek that approval from her record company, perhaps, or just from the country music industry in general and her fans. That's something I was trying to do with like my parents, right? You know what I'm trying to say?
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
you're trying to get this approval
Right.
and you're trying to be somebody that you may not be, but you are exploring who you may be. And when you start getting
Yeah.
Right.
rewarded for acting a certain way, then that feels like the safe way to be. And I could only imagine what it must be like for a 16-year-old's nervous system to suddenly be like thrust into fame, right? And not
Right.
know what you're supposed to
Yeah.
Seriously.
do and to be rewarded and be sort of like, well, now where do I go in life? If I don't do what I'm supposed to do, what they've
Right.
told me I'm supposed to do, does that mean the end of my career?
Right.
Right.
Okay,
Absolutely.
so where do we think that shifts for her? Do we think that it was the incident with Ye? Because that's my personal belief is when all of that shit went down at the VMAs that we saw in real time, like this,
Mm-hmm.
you can see it on her face
Yeah. Yeah.
in
Right.
that moment as it's happening. Like you can see
Mm-hmm.
this whole thing shifting with her. And it was just, it's
Mm.
one of the more profound experiences that I've seen just that happening the way that it did live as it was for us. I guess it
Right.
wasn't really live, but
Ugh.
you know what I mean? Just watching that happen, it was just the feeling that I had for her in that moment,
Mm.
even though I wasn't a fan at the time. And to just think of like what she may have been going through. And now looking at it through this lens, like how did that affect where she's gone since, right? So what do you think? Do you think
Yeah.
it was the
Right.
incident with Ye at the VMAs?
Well, in her, documentary Miss Americana, that was definitely addressed in a pretty significant way. And it's like the main takeaway I got from it was that was in that moment, it seems like a very formative experience, perhaps even go as far as to say traumatic, because
Yeah.
in that situation, I think she felt pretty kind of terrified and taken off guard and helpless and like had this feeling
Yeah.
that she says that everyone started booing and she assumed they were booing her.
Yes, I
Mhm.
So this
remember
feeling of
that.
just like absolute rejection by two, absolute icons of the pop culture at the time, Kanye West and Beyonce were, powerhouses in the industry. And she's this up and coming 18-year-old or something. So it seemed
Yeah.
like it was pretty earth shattering for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then there was, more drama that came into play a few years later
Right.
with Kim and Ye in him calling her a bitch and saying that, he made her famous, basically.
Right.
And, you do see this all she's ever done is be a good girl, right? Like at that point, it was like,
Mm.
all I've ever done, I've played these roles, I've like
Right.
played by your rules, and then and now people are gonna attack me for being the person that they wanted. Like,
Right.
I think she also talks about like there's no win in this
Yep.
situation. Like,
Mm.
so why not just be my fucking self right now? Because like
Yes.
what do I have to
Reputation.
lose?
Let's
And
go.
that's where Reputation was born. I think that is like really what I see as this like the space where you can see in her music, in the videos, in, the way she's interacting with her fans and the media. And kind of what she does after that with like reclaiming her albums and, starting these Taylor versions,
Hmm.
right? She is, not going to take anybody's bullshit any longer, right? She's like, I've had
Right.
enough. I don't need to be the good girl you guys all wanted me to be at first. Like, that's not who I am. And then, I feel like that at that point too, the fans really started being like, oh my gosh, like, we have so much more respect for this human being who's already been talking to us through her songs, like we're reading her
Mm.
diary. But now, like, you can just see this grit and this
Hmm.
fearlessness come out of her at that point, which I have so much respect for. Like,
Yeah. Yeah, it's really
hmm,
interesting. Like, to me, it seems like Reputation was sort of the direct in the moment response with all these themes of
mm-hmm,
like revenge and just like, the snake and
yes,
sort of reclaiming her image.
yeah,
Like, I'm gonna do whatever I want. And then I feel like years later when we get Midnights, it's sort of this like retrospective now that things have calmed down and she's pretty much
mm,
risen to the top of the music industry versus with Reputation, she is coming out of 1989, which won Album of the Year at the Grammys and was like incredibly popular. Then she essentially got like canceled by a tremendous amount of people, and then is responding to that. I think with Midnight, she has a
yeah,
lot more security, probably within perhaps her personal life as well. Like she's older and it has more of this sense of like I can reflect on what happened, and it seems to me a lot of the songs on Midnights are kind of going back and looking at her
mm,
like I did everything I could to make this career work. And along the way, I had to find what was going to honor me instead of just constantly giving myself to my audience.
yeah,
That wasn't sustainable.
yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about the time when she isolated herself. When was that happening? Which albums was that in between?
I think that was between 1989 and the Reputation
Yeah.
album.
Yeah, so I am like not, the Swiftie historian by any means, because there really are people that are like know her story in and out. But my understanding was basically 1989 was this era of like incredible popularity and success, and then the drama that came out with Kim and Kanye basically painted her as the snake and villain, and a lot of people were like done with Taylor Swift. Like a lot of the public took Kim and Kanye's
Hmm.
side. So she kind of disappeared and no longer was seen in public for almost a year, and then came back with Reputation and just sort of dropped the album and reclaimed her reputation, which was sounds pretty powerful.
Yeah, so it looks like a 1989 was a 2014 album, and then Reputation didn't come out until 2017. So, we've
Right.
got a few years in there where I think she was like marinating in this.
She had this opportunity during that time because I do remember her saying in one of her documentaries that she felt like nobody wanted to see her anyway. Like everybody
Right.
was
Mm,
over Taylor Swift, so she just went away. And I feel like that gave her this opportunity to work on healing and deciding who does she want to be. I don't know if that's what she
hmm.
did during
Mm-hmm.
that time. I guess only Taylor Swift knows that, but that's something that I personally went through myself as I was starting to understand that I had control over my self-concept and my self-talk and my mindset and all of these things, right? I isolated myself for about 3 months from everybody in my life because I did not want any external influence over what I was trying to do.
Yeah. That's interesting. I kind of had a hermit, I call it a hermit mode or a hermit phase. I could say a hermit era, perhaps. When I was in this process of healing from trauma, I had kind of just started like the therapy process, and I moved. So I got in a new environment, met new people, and sort of just felt this really intense calling towards solitude and sort of like inner work for the first time as someone who has, I think I am an extrovert, to be honest, but in that time I really needed to kind of go within and process a lot of stuff. And I feel like that time was so critical for me in my life. So yeah, it's interesting to see how that could possibly be represented by Taylor's sort of Reputation era. It's interesting though, because she comes out really swinging with a lot of anger and rage, but also a lot of love. Like,
oh, that's so interesting.
yeah, Reputation's aesthetic is kind of, dark, but a lot of the songs are love songs. It's really interesting to see that distinction.
That sounds so similar to something that I feel like I am experiencing as well, because my hermit era never really fully went back to how I used to be, right? I mean, we've had a pandemic and all of these other things that sort of got thrown into the mix, but I've sort of been trying to find myself again. And I relate to what you're saying as being an extrovert and things. And I moved as well, and I changed my environment, and I started trying to get back into the world and just found it really difficult. And I think it's because I'm still processing a lot of the trauma. My trauma went on for decades. And so and I didn't even realize how to process the trauma, right? Because I was thinking about my feelings a lot. I wasn't feeling my feelings, and I didn't know the difference until about 3 years ago. And that was a really big shift for me personally, was to start understanding that I needed to process my emotions and the trauma and feel them and do my parts work and all of these different things. And what I'm experiencing now is a lot of fucking anger as I'm doing this. Sounds like I need to binge the Reputation album.
Yeah.
Yes. I think that, this is really interesting because we do see how our culture doesn't really respect or give space for that type of healing, and this is the culture that says, okay, we're going to reward you, Taylor, for being this sweet pop, happy, upbeat, fun,
always smiling,
or
smiling individual.
Even her suffering from heartbreak, I feel like, is rewarded
Yeah.
in the songs. Like her sort of, like suffering over what is interpreted as a man, right? It's like, that's acceptable. But then actually being like, I'm going to reclaim my reputation was not super well received.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and just the fact that people even need space to heal is not really respected in our culture at all,
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
I think this is just so important for especially women to understand, men as well, but for women to understand that, we can be angry. Like, it's okay to go through this array of feelings and spaces. Like, that is the human experience. Like, all of it makes this beautiful tapestry of what we're going to think of our lives as, and it's how we respond to that. If we just like let it boggle us down and pretend like it's not happening, it's not a good example to live by. And I think she really is. A lot of, the fans see her as this individual who they can look up to because they respect, and she's transparent with them about what she's going through and how she's feeling. And that makes her, that vulnerability makes her so relatable and lovable,
Oh, this is blowing my mind.
I feel like giving a shout out towards Folklore and Evermore, who I think, following off the back of Lover, which certainly had, some deep themes, but was more of like an aesthetically and sonically upbeat album, I guess. Folklore and Evermore explores so much like grief and anger in a different way than Reputation, which I think Reputation had that more reactive sort of like, rah, like I'm taking back my reputation, blah, like, like this is very forward facing. it seems like folklore and evergreen are more of that deeper processing work. And yeah, I absolutely agree. Like my whole podcast is centered around looking at Taylor's music through a trauma informed lens. And so whether she intentionally set out to do that or not, there's like so much representation for the trauma healing process within her music, including, you know, grief and anger and all those things that you just mentioned.
What I love about that too is there's usually not a lot of space for women to be angry unless they're sort of seen as pariahs in the world. And just what's coming to mind for me is Courtney Love, who just kind of walked around pissed off for the majority of the 90s and early 2000s. And I totally related to her when I was younger. Courtney Love was my fucking idol when I was younger. And artistically, she was my idol. And I loved that she was able to be angry. And as I'm sitting here, like just processing this episode that we're recording right now, like this is happening in real time for me, I'm understanding that anger is one of the emotions that I do not really allow myself to feel, because I've heard people say, I don't want to start crying because I'm afraid I'll never be able to stop, right? And crying has never been an issue to me. Crying is the way that I release a lot of emotions, whether it's grief, sadness, or joy, right? Crying is a go-to for me. It's something that feels very cathartic and cleansing for me. Anger, I feel like I don't have control over anger, and I am afraid that the anger will never stop, or that I'll just start like fucking destroying shit, because sometimes I want to. Sometimes I just want to pick up a bat and just fucking start destroying things. And the anger feels really scary to me.
Yeah, we're the exact opposite. I'm the exact opposite. I'm the terrified of grief and tears and have a really hard time feeling those things. But anger, I'm like, let's go. Like, I'm ready to be pissed off.
I love that she gave herself space by doing an angry album, though. And I love that you bring that perspective, Emmy, because I didn't realize, I haven't had a chance to listen to all of her music yet, and I didn't realize that Reputation was sort of that anger album. You know what I mean? And I really appreciate you bringing that perspective to this. Thank you.
Yeah, well, what you might find interesting or surprising is, like I kind of mentioned, the aesthetic of Reputation is very like black and white, you know, like angry or confident. And then a lot of the songs are about love and relationships and are very like, I am so in love, which is very interesting to contrast that, but definitely has a tone about it.
Well, and in my body, I can see that I relate to that as well, too, because I'm angry because I love everybody so much. I'm angry because these relationships aren't the way that I imagine them to be or the way that I desire them to be. They're not healing. They're not in this space of everybody being validated and seen and heard and respected, right? They're dysfunctional fucking relationships. And it makes me angry because I have so much love, and I'm just like, I just want to shake everybody. And I just want to like be like, wake the fuck up. Like, why don't you want something better? Why don't you want connection? Why don't you want this healing and restoration or repair of our relationship? You know, I don't understand it. And I think that's where a lot of the anger comes from, on top of just thinking about, you know, some of the things that I experienced when I was going through a lot of the trauma when I was younger. And the violence is like, why would you even do this to a child? You know what I mean? Why would you put a child in this? So I have anger about that, but that ultimately comes down to love too, because I just wanted to be loved. I just wanted to be in loving family, in a loving home. So I love that there is this, it's all love, 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 love. I really appreciate that there's this sort of contrast between the anger and the love, because I think that, that's really present inside of me, even as I'm going through what I'm going through right now. So I like that she created space for that in her music.
Well, if I was going to like prescribe you a song for everything that you just shared with us, I would give you my Tears Ricochet from Folklore. I just did a whole episode kind of analyzing that through the lens of like leaving a dysfunctional family, and there's a lot of themes of like they aren't willing to repair, and they're kind of turning me into the villain, which I'm not sure is what you're going through, but check that one out.
It is something that I relate to, and I have been listening to that episode of your podcast, actually.
Oh, no way. Nice.
So I'm not through all of it yet, but I have been listening to it. So I appreciate that, and I know exactly what you're talking about. So thank you so much. And yeah, go listen to that episode of Emmy's podcast if you haven't. It's Heal in Harmony podcast.
I love that you said prescribe you a song. I think that's such a beautiful thing.
Dishing out songs. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love that too. I would like to get a little bit into this other self-concept evolution that I've seen within Taylor, and that is around her master tapes, and then something that Minx mentioned off air, which was some of the other things that she's been through. Like you mentioned the groping situation.
Yeah, the lawsuit. Yeah.
I'd like to just touch base on those types of things and how they've been a part of her self-concept evolution as well, and her bringing in even her political stance on things, and which she used to be so, I don't want to say quiet, but she used to be very more, I guess, more private about. And that, if I want to be honest, that's one of the reasons that I didn't have any interest in her, is because I didn't see her doing anything to use her platform. But I just want to kind of touch on that. What do you guys think about those things?
Well, so I think, for instance, with the political stance stuff, it was not popular. And I think we actually look at this in the Miss Americana documentary, like the what are they called? The Dixie Chicks came out against, the war, and them being, very forward facing, like in the South, at least in Texas, that was just such an unpopular opinion. And then for a lot of celebrities, they just shied away from making political stances because there was like giant backlash there, So for a long time, it was just culturally unacceptable for people in spaces of power to talk about certain things. Yeah, with this groping situation, she was fondled and, violated by a man. And then he had the gall to like sue her, I guess, for saying something, talking about it. And then she countersued for like $1, right? And I feel like that incident really brought out a lot of anger and passion and drive for her to talk about women's issues and to talk about like what there is shit going on in this country that it is not right. Like human rights are being violated. And that's when she shifted her perspective on that and was like, once that kind of, I think she did lead like a fairly sheltered life from a lot of these bigger issues. And once that happened to her, she was able to, understand that, I need to start using my platform to discuss these things.
Yeah, I personally am very aware that, to me, it seems like Taylor is willing to speak up on issues that sort of affect her, and that I am not going to look to Taylor Swift, who has incredible music, as a activist that I should be looking up to for political advice. Like, that's kind of how I reconcile her, whatever. Like in Antihero, she says, did you hear my covert narcissism got disguised as altruism, like some kind of congressman? Like, it seems like she is aware of the fact that, she has used activism in the past to, advocate for things that affect her, but not necessarily things that don't. And so I am not looking up to her as a role model for activism. That being said, as a public figure of a much, 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 much tinier caliber, I am, and, as someone who has a traumatized nervous system, I am personally familiar with the feeling of terror that your people in your audience are going to hate you, right? Or come at you and attack you. And so to someone with that large of a platform, like, obviously there's the aspect that she doesn't want to lose profit, and that's something that can be critiqued, absolutely. But her physical safety is certainly something that needs to be considered if we think about all the issues that she could possibly speak out and advocate for. So I'm not trying to make excuses for her
Yeah.
versions of activism, but it makes sense to me that it's like she was probably absolutely terrified to speak out about any political beliefs whatsoever. I kind
Yeah.
of get it. And yeah, but it does seem like she was emboldened at a certain point, and that's kind of what the whole Miss Americana documentary is sort of centered on, is her being like, enough is enough. I'm ready to take a stand politically, despite her team and like even her dad really being like, you shouldn't do this. So
Yeah.
Holy shit, I love your perspective on that so much.
oh,
And I
Yeah.
really
thanks.
appreciate that you brought in this idea of what did you say about the narcissism and the altruism? Because that is
Yeah.
a revelation that I had. God damn it, I have more in common with Taylor Swift than I realized. So it's just fascinating to me because that was something that I went
Yeah.
through as I started doing my self-concept work, and it started shifting my mindset and my self-talk as I started to realize that a lot of the work that I was doing in activism and with climate justice and social justice was really, in a lot of ways, me looking for approval. And yes, I did believe in the causes, but the bottom line was it was actually doing more harm to me than good. I was walking around in a state of perpetual depression because I was so upset and unable to do anything about the things that I was so upset about. And then I would just get upset with everybody else in my life for not wanting to do the same amount of work that I was doing to try to like change legislation or go out and educate people on what they could be doing about, you know, reducing their plastic use or whatever it may be, right? And so I just really appreciate you bringing that perspective because yes, my social justice work and my climate justice work, the work was very important to me, but it was also virtue signaling. I wanted to be seen as a good person.
Totally. And who doesn't? I mean, that's like such a part of human nature, is to be seen as a good, want to be seen,
Yeah.
want to be accepted, want to be loved. Like, the fear of being rejected and canceled is, I think, in our DNA, because as humans, like as a human species, we thrive in groups and it's a struggle to survive on our own. So I think it's so human to want to be loved. And, if that does cause, like, a lot of bad can also be done by our desire to belong, like, really intense hate groups, there's an element of community there and a feeling of acceptance that leads to a lot of harm being done. So if a feeling of wanting to be loved and accepted drives you towards
Wow.
climate justice or other forms of social justice, there's worse things you could be doing with that. But I totally hear you.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. Whew. This is like so much is processing.
Yeah.
Let's get into the master tapes really quick.
What a genius. I mean, I've got so much respect for this woman after doing more and more research and just learning more about her. But oh my gosh, she is so smart, so clever, so, she's creative. She is looking at these issues, and instead of being like brought down by stuff like, oh, all these albums, they were owned by this record label, I guess I'll just give up, she reclaimed herself and reclaimed her voice in a very creative, empowering way. And I think that is another reason why people have so much respect for her, and that she really is driving this like massive following, because geez, like,
Yeah.
she's huge. She's so intelligent. This woman is so clever.
Right. I'm not really, like, once again, all that well versed on the actual like process of her reclaiming her records, but my understanding is basically she is re-recording all of her records that were owned by her old record label so she can officially own them. And obviously it's a way for her to make more money, but I get the impression that it's more about the personal autonomy and ownership over her work, her creative work.
Yeah.
So in the process of doing this, I've seen it, people really were looking at it like this is a very risky endeavor to go back and record albums. There is no guarantee people are going to want to listen to these albums again. But over the process, I believe she's done 4 out of the 6 now. They have broken so many records of album sales, which is really proving that her fans are loving her work. And honestly, more and more people are growing to love her work through these re-recordings. So to me, it seems like an incredible way of reclaiming.
Yeah. Yeah, and she's incentivizing her audience at the same time. So she's like
Totally.
hiding these Easter eggs and other tracks
Right. And giving new
to
music.
like
Hmm.
make it a creative game. Exactly, right? So it becomes like a game for her fans too. So she's like
Yeah.
gamifying this experience of listening to her music, and like with the Easter eggs and like with all of these like puzzles that she's kind of built into her music videos and the new tracks. Like she broke Google, you know.
Right.
Like
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't working because everybody, you know, once one of those albums came out, it was like, okay, every single Taylor Swift fan in the world, like I don't know how many people, a lot of individuals are
Yeah.
just enamored by her and just want to feel like they're a part of
Yeah.
that community of other Swifties.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that and how we've seen this play out in our culture right now?
Yeah, so you know, I mean, we the people that I've spoken to, and you know what I've read about Taylor over the last like month that I've kind of been doing this research, is that, you know, one of the reasons she has been somebody who speaks to people for so long is that she has this very special way of connecting with her fans through secret messages, kind of like, you know, how it was described to me, like how you would listen to like one of the Beatles records backwards and it was like there was a secret and hidden message in there. So she had these like fun games ever since the beginning, right?
It's a lot of like fandoms in general put a lot of Easter eggs
Yeah,
around for
exactly.
people to find and make connections, and it makes it fun. And then when you
Mhm.
do make the connection or find it, you feel fucking brilliant and like you really
Yeah.
are a fan, you know? It's
Yeah,
very validating.
exactly. Yeah. It is. Yeah. So, you know, I think that for a while it was like more playful when it referring to like different ex-boyfriends and music videos and stuff, like wearing the paper plane necklace and reference to like one of her exes and, you know, having the CD cover spell out maple latte and this like hidden code referring to another ex-boyfriend, having these, you know, different like little coded secret messages in these different spaces have been this like playful way for her to engage with her audience. And so you continue to see that though as she's been releasing these newer albums. Like I think in one of in the Reputation album, there was the video for Look at What You Made Me Do, which I love that music video so much. Not only because it like shows these kind of alternate realities and archetype exploration, but we also see like her pressing the number 3 on the elevator and it's like in purple. So everybody is like, oh my gosh, the third album is going to be the next one that she drops, you know? So she has this way of like secretly referencing like what she's going to do to her fans. And she directs I think she like directs all these videos. Like I think she's the one that's like creatively in
That's
charge
my understanding as
of the
well.
storytelling there.
Yeah.
Which is it, and they're so fun. They're so fun.
Absolutely.
One other thing that I'm really interested in looking at, because I'm actually developing an archetype embodiment course right now, is the archetype exploration of Taylor. And what I loved, we were looking at like during the tour, the Eras tour that she did, you know, all the fans were coming dressed up as Taylor from different albums and like embodying these different Taylors, you know, and you see her also showing her different archetype selves in different music videos, right? And I think that's just so beautifully done in the fact that she is recognizing that, no, I'm not just one thing. Like, here are all of my selves. I don't want to try to just be one thing anymore. I'm going to embody all of this. I'm going to embody this like demon snake lady. I'm going to embody this like this undead human stomping through a graveyard. I'm going to embody this like, you know, deer in the headlights who just accepted the VMA award and, you know, got yelled at by this older dude on stage. Like I'm going to embody all of these selves because that is what has brought me to this moment of where I am now. And I just see this like acceptance of her, accepting all of her, you know?
Yep. Love that. Yeah, I agree. And it's interesting from my perspective with all the trauma recovery stuff, how like it can be so tempting. And this was definitely my personal experience to essentially like exile every part of you that you felt like was connected to your victimization or your trauma or whatever it is you went through. So if you were like, oh, like me being a people pleasing good girl was led to my downfall, then I'm going to go completely on the other side and become like very avoidant, very hyper independent, very, I don't need anyone, like I don't trust anyone, all that stuff. And that's really not sustainable for most human beings. You know, we need connection, we need others. And so trying to find this balance is kind of, I think, a part of the healing journey where it comes to, you know, integration, self-acceptance, making space for every part of you. And so, yeah, to see that reflected in her imagery and her current music is pretty awesome. Like, I think it's relatable for where I'm at with healing on a personal level.
Yeah.
So, Emmy, do you have any personal sort of things that you would like to share with the work that you've been doing around Taylor's music and lyrics and how that's reflected back to us in our culture right now?
Sure. So basically, my podcast came about because I'm a huge Taylor Swift fan, music wise, and I was finding lots of themes in her song that reflected back to me experiences of abusive relationships and trauma and recovery. And so I love just like analyzing lyrics. So I decided, you know, why not? Let's make a whole podcast out of this. And so typically the things that I do is look for, yeah, just like representation. Like a good example in the song Would Have, Could Have, Should Have from Midnight to me is a representation of being in an abusive relationship as a teenager. She is referencing being the age of 19 in the song. And that's what I went through. And so that it could be interpreted in a different way, but to me, there's like a lot of really loud and clear themes of being exploited and abused by someone older than you in a sexual or romantic way. And so I think that is just really, really important because Taylor Swift is like, I think the most popular pop star of our time right now. And sure, a lot of her hits are not covering that kind of dark subject matter. But if someone is kind of going through a recovery process from trauma like that, or is in an abusive relationship at that moment, hearing a song like that could be, you know, really supportive for them to pursue healing or just to feel less alone. So I'm really into that aspect of her music. And that's kind of like the personal work I do, I guess, is sort of bringing that analysis to my podcast and to my audience.
Oh my gosh, this has been such an amazing conversation.
Yeah.
I'm so excited to go listen to more of Taylor's music and learn more about her and listen to more of your podcast because this is giving me so much to think about and bring into my own experience and my own healing. And I just really appreciate it. So, Emmy, I'd like to ask, do you have any offers that you would like to discuss and share with us and tell people how they can pay you, support you, and follow you? And if there are any projects or causes that you would like to share?
Yeah, thanks for asking. Yeah, if you're a Taylor Swift fan, definitely go to my podcast. I hope you like it. It's very niche, you know, it's Taylor Swift trauma recovery. So check that out. It's called Heal in Harmony. And as far as offerings, ways you can work with me, like previously mentioned at the beginning, I do trauma informed coaching. So basically, if there is an aspect in your life that you're feeling stuck in and you want a really compassionate, trauma informed perspective and support to help you move through that, or move closer to your goal or intention. That's what my one-on-one coaching is all about. In addition, I do have some courses and a lower cost membership community as well. So all of that can really be found on my website, emmymarie.com. And then as far as social media goes, I'm at BloomingWithEmmy.
Thank you. All right. So let's get into our embodiment exercise for the week that we're going to send you all out into the world with. So we spoke earlier about people dressing up as Taylor Swift albums. This was something that I was informed about by an 11-year-old, actually.
Oh my God,
and then Minx mentioned it also. So this is the thing. So her friend, the 11-year-old I was talking to, her friend dressed up as the Red album, and I believe she dressed up as the Midnight albums.
Nice.
So our embodiment exercise is this. We want you to choose one of Taylor's albums and embody that album. So you're looking at the version of Taylor then, right? So what types of clothing would that version of Taylor wear? What types of scents would she be surrounding by? What would be the sensory experiences that version of Taylor would be reflecting back to you in each album? What does that version of Taylor eat and drink? What are her hobbies? How does she dance? What media does she engage with? How does she spend her free time? Those are the things that we'd like you to consider as you're listening to one of Taylor's albums, and then to go that next step, do those things while you're listening to the album. Put on a particular type of clothing, or spray a certain scent that you like, or get a burrito.
Oh, yeah.
That's what we would like to encourage you to explore this week. Thank you so much for joining us today, Emmy. I really appreciate it. Do you have any final thoughts that you would like to share with us before Minx gives us a summary of this episode?
I guess just to add on to that very nice little embodiment practice that I think is so sweet would be maybe picking one of those albums that you feel like speaks to a part of you that you don't often get to express, like she has so many different eras, aesthetics, vibes, feelings represented by her eras. Like maybe picking one that is, not totally overwhelming, but something that brings out a side of you that doesn't always get to see the light of day. So if that's, your Reputation era, or if you're very comfortable with that, it's more of the Lover era or something, seeing what, gives you space to breathe.
I like that.
Yeah, thank you for that. I really appreciate that. That's a good addition to the exercise. Thank you, Emmy.
Sure.
Oh my gosh, this has been such a fun conversation. And I'm really just so much of what I think Taylor brings to her music through her music videos is this visual representation of what she's going through. So as I've been thinking about how I want to summarize this episode, I've been drawn to like the image of a flower with all these different like multicolored petals that represent like a different part of who Taylor is, and how she's able to hold and embody all of those different pieces in one space and in one in one form, right? But she does give this equal space and honor and appreciation and love to all of these different parts of her. So, I think it's so important, as we've spoken earlier, just about being able to honor and respect each and every part of yourself, even if it is hard, even if there is like shame there potentially, but really holding space and understanding that that is a part of you that has helped you along your path of getting to the space where you are now. And even if you're not in a space where you're comfortable with that story yet, you're gonna get there, right? Like that is the path that you are on. Even if you are in one of those darker spaces, everything will change. You will move on. That's the one thing that we can guarantee in our lives, right? So just looking at Taylor as this kind of archetype embodiment wizard is like how I see her. And
maybe she's a witch.
She's able to speak to
the coven of Taylor
exactly.
Swift.
The Willow Eras Tour set is definitely giving witch vibes, so I respect that.
Yes.
Oh my God, totally. It's just so fun visually to think about her and her journey. So yeah, thank you so much for coming on this little mini journey with us talking about her today, Emmy.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was fun.
Thank you so much to our audience for joining us today. We really appreciate you. And we'd ask that you please follow, subscribe, rate, like, share, review, and do all of the things. You can find us on social media at Ventralverse Media. You can also find this podcast in particular at The Uncanny Lens on Instagram. And if you would like to connect with Emmy, you can find her at BloomingWithEmmy. If you are listening on Spotify, we also invite you to interact with our polls and questions. This has been absolutely delightful. And I just want to thank you both for your time and energy this morning, and that we were able to have such an uplifting discussion. I've just discovered a lot about myself just in the last hour that we've been talking, and I really appreciate both of you for that. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Until next time, keep creating your favorite version of yourself, and remember to revel on.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.